It's like the North Pole at my house right now. So my internet's a little instability because it's like unstable because it's blowing and it's crazy snowing. So in case I magically disappear, that is what's happening for me right now.
Yeah,
So
honestly, I got like 6 inches last night, 6 or 7 inches, and snowing right now.
dumping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you?
I think we're predicted 3 feet or something.
So, Sam, Wendy, you both are in Colorado right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, my friends are telling me it's really dumping there. I don't know what's going on. I guess that's good for our moisture.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So we have to carry on if you lose internet, you two. You know what I'm hearing?
Yes.
That's right. I made
We're such a
that.
big team now, so we're ready for anything. If someone has to drop off, we all just pick it up. Just keep it going.
That's right. We're experts at this. We've had over like 200 episodes or something.
Gosh,
like
I think, are we going on to 4 years now?
that. I'm not sure. I've lost track.
What a,
just like
legacy,
People strategy forums.
what a legacy, though, to have that many. Like, how did you show up during COVID? You know, you started this thing and you did it. That's a big deal. That's great. It's cool.
Yeah, and we get to watch each other age, you know?
Yeah.
It's
We
great.
get to watch
Thanks, Char.
we get to watch my hair color change and my skin color change, no matter where I'm living at that moment.
That's funny.
Well,
What else
Jules and
do
Wendy,
know?
you color coordinated too. Like those are the same pink from my screen. It's impressive.
Oh, amazing, we're pink.
Sorry, Wade.
You can't
I
tell. I'm
literally
blue.
own one thing in this color. So I'm glad we
There it
coordinated
is.
today, Jules.
I got this shade it's like a whole section in my closet. I just love pink and coral. They're my colors.
Me too.
I like coral. Yes. I think pink, it's February. It's a color for February anyways. So
Yeah, we still are in February.
we are. What year are we in?
1989.
It's like a time warp.
Oh no.
All right. Let's
I
go
want
ahead.
to get. I'm gonna go get my journal for the discussion.
There you go.
I want to show. I have a signed copy.
Oh, fancy.
Sweet.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get things kicked off.
All right, and I see Howard hopped on. See, our team's big. I told you guys. So, all right, we'll get started. All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the People Strategy Forum. My name is Jules, and I help introduce our panel of hosts and our guest speakers, but I also love to hang out in the chat during these sessions, because if you have any questions, comments, feedback at all, write it into the chat for us, address it to everyone so we can all see what you're saying, and we'll try to get as many questions and comments out during the discussion. We have about 45 to 50 minutes, so get those questions in there. And if you've never been to a People Strategy Forum, today's topic is join the DEI conversation. And we have pause journals today. We're going to learn all about these pause journals. I'm really excited. It's going to be a great discussion because every week we actually bring different guest speakers. And today we have Wade Forbes and Angela Sharenza joining us, and they actually created these pause journals. So what better way to go through the journal than with the creators, right? And we have actually had a few different discussions around journaling. So we're just going to go deeper in that conversation today, and also discuss how it actually can help support the DEI journey in companies. And in general, the People Strategy Forum, we're really here to just help engage and energize and elevate your employees and your company as well. So be sure to take notes, maybe in your journal. And before I introduce our speakers, I'll introduce all our hosts. This is our general lineup here. We get together each and every week. There's a lot of expertise amongst our panel of hosts. So I'll get started with Char, who is in Mexico right now working on her tan, very jealous. And she is an entrepreneur who has a large background in human resources. She's co-founded many businesses in her time. She's working on a new one right now, which which is really exciting. And she's also worked as a career coach as well. We have Howard, who is an expert when it comes to compensation and compensation software. He's helped many companies over the years improve their compensation departments. And we also have Wendy. Wendy is a talent management expert. She's trained in the TMA method and works with the team at CompTeam. Sumit isn't able to join us today, but he's normally here as well. So that's our panel. And we also have Sam, who brings us the People Strategy Forum. He is the founder and CEO of CompTeam. He's also an expert with all things talent initiatives and compensation as well. So that brings us to our guest speakers. You might actually remember this person because we've had him here before. So a warm welcome back to Wade Forbes, who is the founder of Redtail Communications. And he is a very special talent. He's a skilled artist who brings conversations to life with his sketches. He illustrates. He was just telling us about his illustrations that he just did for Nick Offerman's new book, which is very cool. So he has a lot of great stories to share with us today. And the other speaker that we have today is Angela Sharenza, who partnered with Wade on this fabulous journal. I'm really excited to hear all about this journal. She is an executive coach who has also consulted for a lot of companies in industries such as gaming and entertainment and healthcare. So welcome to you both, and welcome back, Wade. And we're just excited to dive in and hear all about this fabulous new journal.
Yeah, wonderful to have both of you. So can you just tell us a little bit how this came to be? How did the journal come into existence? What was the spark that created this journal?
I kind of want to hear Angela's version of this story because mine is rather disjointed. As an artist would be, artists are horrible project managers. So I'd love to hear Angela's version of how this came to be.
Sounds good. Thanks, Wade. And I have a tendency to be more of a linear thinker, so we work well together in that capacity. So Wade and I met, I think, circa 2014 at we were both working together in a professional consulting firm, if you will, a government contractor. And Wade was in a leadership development program that I was responsible for, and we started having coaching conversations about the work that Wade was doing. And all I kept thinking was, this guy doesn't belong behind a desk in a room without windows. And so we had a lot of conversations about that. There's more to that story that we could go on for hours about, but we just built a friendship and a relationship over coaching and learning and development and leadership. And out of that, Wade, I'm going to turn it over to you for where you went next after we first met there.
So Angela and I kept in touch over the years as our roles changed. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I started drawing all these tiny little Post-it notes and posting them on social media, just to spread hope and shift the narrative from fear and all the ways things could go wrong to really hope and joy and the other emotions on all the ways things could go right. And as a professional listener, I draw for conversations and I hear people wrestling with various things. Sometimes an organization's wrestling with strategy, sometimes they're wrestling with the vision, but a lot of them were wrestling with DEI topics and they didn't know where to start. So I said, what if I could draw these quotes and just help people start to see their journey unfolding by thinking through these things? And then all of a sudden I realized I'd amassed a lot of quotes on DEI. So Angela and I got in touch and I said, Angela, could you help me curate these quotes so that we could create a journal that helps the DEI facilitators and professionals that are trying to further these conversations and improve the outcomes, not only for themselves, but for the people that they're facilitating. And Angela, bless her heart, went through hundreds of these Post-it notes that I had created and started to pull out the ones that really struck a chord. And I couldn't have done it without her because the stuff that she has learned in her experience as a coach was just invaluable to me. Stuff that I didn't have, things that I couldn't have as a white male trying to help in a place where I'm sometimes part of the problem. And so Angela brought a perspective that was out of this world for me in this project. And we got the quotes together, and then Angela, you were asked to write.
I'm going to add two more things to the now nonlinear story, which one, in that leadership development program that I talked about at the graduation dinner for that program, Wade had started sketching out on napkins salient pieces of learning that had come out of that program. And so that's where I first remember this side gig starting, right? And then again, he fast forward to lots of conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. At the point Wade and I started talking about this, I had attended a program and studied to add more rigor to the conversation, to add more research, and so that I was more informed. And what we were doing with that journal was really identifying patterns and looking at what are we seeing in the journal and what are we not seeing in the journal. And what we weren't seeing is what we really kind of honed in on in order to add, frankly, a more diverse set of drawings to the conversation so that there was more representation. That's it. And here we are.
Yeah, and here we are. And so the intent was, I think all of us have sat through workshops where people had really good intentions and they wanted to help us. And it's like, okay, I'm going to put you through an 8-hour diversity, equity, and inclusion course. And at the end, you're going to be more inclusive, less racist, and you're going to understand people that are not like you. And that's just not the case. You need lots of exposure. You need lots of understanding. You need to have an open heart. And the idea was, what if we could give them a place where they could pause and be quiet with their thoughts? And so this journal, the Pause Journal, was an opportunity to say, when you turn to a page and say, you know, the only thing that should ever be sorted by color is your laundry, where does your mind go? Where do you start to think about how that idea was ever introduced into your mind? Did it happen in your childhood? Did it happen the way your friends joked? Is it happening at the water cooler with your coworkers? How do you start to unpack that thought? And what's fascinating is my mind goes to certain places, but when people start to interact with this, you hear all the different places people's minds go. And it's a chance to just be quiet. And for me, I needed a place to be clumsy. I needed a place to wrestle with my thoughts. I needed a place to kind of maybe not get it right the first time, maybe not the third, the fourth, or the fifth, but on the 6th try, I had something that was filled with growth, with genuine intentions. But I also knew that it wasn't going to be 100%. And it was easier to do it in a quiet place. I'm curious, Angela, is there a quote that jumps out at you in this, or is there any particular quote that you recall that was kind of like, yeah, that's the one?
The honest answer is no, because of the number of quotes that we went through. I think what's also been interesting about this particular journal is the introduction that we wrote together. For me, in facilitating conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the things that can be really helpful with this journal and with guiding conversations as a result of it is that it's the notion of pausing requires presence. And so there's stories in this journal and there are quotes that run throughout the journal that come from people from a long time ago and come from people that are still with us today. And there's stories in here that are also by their nature, because they were written down and then printed, in our history. And there's still things happening today that impact people. I was in a cab not too long ago in New York and was called some pretty awful things because of how I look. And so for me, it's about all of that. It's about bringing everything together. And again, taking a minute to take a deep breath, to reflect on things. And one of the things Wade and I had talked about too with this journal is this notion of having an opportunity to try again. And this being a safe space to do that, as opposed to trying to try again with an individual where there might be damage that's occurring in the relationship or in the conversation. And so taking a minute to pause and think through that all the way here, and then making another run at it, so to speak, or working to do better in the conversation moving forward.
Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
So I was just I don't want to interrupt this track. So go ahead, Wade. I'm going to bring mine up in just a second.
Angela shared that story of her time in a cab, and the very first quote in the journal is by Maya Angelou, and I want your viewers to see. These are little Post-it notes on a page where you can doodle or draw beneath it, and then a place for you to gather your thoughts. But the very first quote in the journal is by Maya Angelou, and it says, "Hate, it has caused a lot of problems in this world, but it hasn't solved one yet." Your mind can go in 1,000 directions. And I imagine what it would be like for an individual to pause, as Angela just stated a moment ago, and be present. But what happens when teams start doing it? What happens when groups of people start doing it, or families, or parents and their children, and they start to really trace back, like, where has hate kind of taken over or been that first thing that was part of the conversation when it shouldn't have been involved at all? Or what if we made it the last part of the conversation? We realized, look at all these other outcomes that could have transpired. And it was an emotional project to put this together. I'm not going to lie. I mean, Angela and I had to do a lot of soul searching ourselves, when we partnered on this, but also just really, I think Emmanuel Acho said it best in his Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man book, when he said, you have to look at what you've been fed, and you start to look at what you've been fed as an individual, and you think about what other people have been fed, and it gives you that moment of grace. But then what are you going to do about it? You're just going to say, like, this happened to me when I was a kid, I was fed those things, or you're going to say, I'm going to eat something else, and I'm going to take in more information. And so, I mean, that's what keeps coming back, is we're all on a journey. I think, Angela, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's a DEI coach or facilitator out there that raises their hand and says, hey, I'm looking forward when everybody arrives to where I am, because I have it all straightened out.
I hope not.
How is that in your, before Sam goes, I'm curious, how did you experience that in your own DEI coaching program that you were in? I mean, did you have a lot of individuals that were healing? And I mean, I think I know the answer. I'm not trying to make it a leading question, but.
So the question I'm hearing, Wade, is what was that experience like? And what I'd offer is that everybody came to the conversation wanting to do better in some capacity. And also, I think, similar to me, looking for rigor and research to put behind it, so that when you get into conversations, how people feel is important. And it's also important to have the data behind it. And so I think both have been really useful conversations to have, because the talking about the impact, the discussions and the conversation about the impact have been really important, in addition to the historical context and what's true today in different parts of the world.
It's so important. The what I was going to bring up is I was really struck by the what you said there, Wade, about everybody comes from a different, I guess, diet, you could say, right? They the way that what they were influenced with when they were being raised, or the culture that they were in. And more and more now, we're being brought together in a more a globally diverse community, and we're more than ever, we're learning about other cultures and different types of people and their backgrounds and so forth. But what I want to point out is the importance of the medium of this journal, and how it's different than other types of mediums that we've used in the past. Typically, companies, when they say, "Oh, we need to educate our people about diversity, equity, and inclusion," they think, "Oh, let's put on a workshop, or maybe we'll have some self-serve videos and that they can watch, or something like this." And Angela, I know you have deep expertise here, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. But the thing that the journal does in the visual representations of this, and the cadence of revisiting this over time, I think delivers a much more meaningful impact on making true behavioral change, and understanding what's their perceptions through our daily work lives and our lives in general. Because a lot of times when we go to a class, we put on a hat, and we're gonna learn for that period of time, and then we switch roles at other moments, and we're focused on other things, and some of that goes to the wayside. So what are your thoughts, Angela, on the importance of having this medium?
So Sam, one of the things that you mentioned that struck a chord with me, and it'll connect to using the medium in just a second, is that notion of like putting on a hat in class and going in with, I suppose, a learner's mindset in some capacity, but being open and willing to engage in the conversation. And what pings for me with that is what this gives you the ability to do, or this medium gives you the ability to do as well, is this concept of use of self. So yes, we all grow up in a variety of different environments with different factors and different influences that shape our thinking and how we view the world. And what this medium gives us an opportunity to do, gives me an opportunity to do, is to use my own self to increase my understanding of where those ideas come from, and to really kind of pick those apart. I also think there's a huge value in engaging in conversation. pair up with a friend, have conversations with a friend about a particular quote. And that's another way to do this, but to really take a minute to reflect back on, where does that thought come from? Where did I first have that idea or that notion or that judgment, whatever it is? What's the source of it and where does it come from and why do I believe that? Or conversely, when was the first time I pushed back on that thought and why? Who encouraged me to think about that? I was raised Catholic. I went to a Catholic university, and I'll never forget my junior year, for example, Dr. De Laurentiis. She'd be proud, I think, that I mentioned her. This was a professor. She taught in the basement of the building, and she taught the origins of Christianity. And that was the first time I really started to ask questions about religion. And I'm super grateful to her for that. And it's those kinds of things to start to kind of click back through, to think through, where does that come from? Where did I start to ask questions? Where did I really dig into what it means to be a part of any religion? And what did that look like? And this medium can give you an opportunity to do that.
So what do you think, Wade? I mean, of course, I think that the talent and the skill set of graphic recording and how it's being applied to business now is making things a lot more meaningful, easier to learn, easier to remember, and so forth. So what kind of impact can graphic recording have on the important topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Interesting you say that. So Angela mentioned earlier in this conversation that she did some coaching with me when we first met in the leadership development program that I was in. And she taught me the value of holding space, and that has different meanings to a lot of people, but to a coach, when you hear holding space, they are holding the space to make sure that whatever needs to be dealt with, whatever needs to be discussed, whatever is heavy is part of the conversation. But what's also great about working with the right people is it doesn't have to stay in that particular form. You can hold space and you can move beyond. And Angela would probably be able to say that in a much more articulate way, but I'll tell you what happened in a recent workshop I was in. I was drawing for justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And what does that acronym spell? JEDI. And I'm drawing the concepts of what these folks are working through in their JEDI program. And people kept wanting me to make Star Wars references. And I refused, because I said, when you do that, you're actually decreasing the meaning of what we're trying to do for the people that are relying on us to change the outcomes, for the people that are not feeling like they are getting the voice and the attention that they deserve, especially when you deduce it to a movie. So as a graphic recorder, I'm drawing these concepts and helping to see what programs I have, but then I had to make sure that I avoided those topics on purpose in many ways, because I didn't want to take away from the space that was being held for those particular conversations, because there are so many conversations we can have. One can be about Star Wars, but this particular day was about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. I felt that it was important to make sure that I lived the values that I wanted to bring to it. And then what was really great is that everybody at the end of that workshop got one of these journals, and now they can turn to page 62 and they can say, and they can read this quote: "If the universe didn't need you, you wouldn't be here." Let's talk about that as a group, and we'll see you on Thursday in our JEDI meeting, right? I mean, there's so many opportunities now that go from listening. I'm a professional listener. I listen to groups for hundreds of hours a year. I hear what's said, but I also hear what's not said. And so now Angela and I have created something where people can go and say, yeah, that whole JEDI thing, that was a great session, but I don't want it to be about Star Wars either, because I need the conversation to pause and be focused on the right things for that time. I mean, in this journal, you can write about a lot of things, but what if you could write about the things that are elusive or have been difficult or hard for you to remain focused on for a long time and actually change your mindset in the conversation? So that's something I try to do with my art. I've also really focused on flesh. As a white man, my hands, my whole life have been white man hands. How do I start to draw different flesh tones? So I've focused a huge amount of time on making sure that there's representation. And it's very emotional when somebody comes to me from another, cultural background and says, "I see myself in your chart." I've never seen myself before. No one's ever drawn me before like that. So thank you. And I've, some tears have slipped out between me and the participants because I took the time to learn that. And some people think I'm just coloring it in just to make it a variety, but I'm coloring it in because I know it matters now. And that's through, I have Angela to thank for that, because to reveal these things and what we've been taught and the way that we've been, and I know I'm talking for a long time, it doesn't have to be awful. You just have to start, and so that's one of the reasons I'm really glad I picked the right person to go through this experience with, because I'm not a horrible human being because I didn't know. I'm a horrible human being. Well, I feel like a horrible human being if I know and I keep doing the thing that's causing pain and discomfort again and again and again. So graphic recording is about listening and listening for hours and then hoping that you might do something that is the ripple that causes the next wave.
Well, one of the things that when we tell stories and when we think back about all the injustices that have happened throughout history, I mean, it can be a pretty dark story, right? And when we talk about these things in forums like this, or in training sessions, or even in graphing in the journal, there's a balance to be struck there. I mean, we have to learn from history, but also we need to turn this into a positive discussion, because a lot of people that are going to these trainings have felt injustices in the past, have gone through the pain, right? And they can, and it's important not to wallow there, right? So how do we take this conversation, learn from the past, and take a positive direction going forward, so people are looking at this with a positive attitude?
I'll jump in on this one, Sam. And what I'd like to do is to be honest, respectfully push back on the notion of working to pivot this to a positive discussion, only from the perspective of, to your point, if there are folks that have been hurt or harmed in the process, to the extent that, to Wade's earlier point as well, to the extent that we create space to have these conversations and to have dialogue, it may not always be positive, and that's okay. And there's a phrase that keeps coming up for me that I heard from, her name is Irshad Manji, and she's an author. And I attended a webinar that she hosted around diversity, equity, inclusion. And one of the phrases that she used that I think resonates for this particular conversation is this notion of, we can't just switch jerseys if we want to change the game. And I don't know if that resonates, but let me work a little bit more on connecting that. And I'm getting a lot of head nods, so hopefully it does. But this notion that in order to make an actual change and to shift the dynamics in society, in our systems, in our organizations, in our teams, in our families, creating that space to engage in the conversation, to be willing to ask hard questions, is not always going to feel like a positive experience necessarily. And I think the outcome in retrospect can be a very positive experience. And so just want to join you back in that conversation to think through how we create those environments and how we create those conversations so that it creates the environment for healing and for understanding and for simply space to engage in the conversation and to understand a little bit more about the person or the groups or the marginalized communities that we're trying to learn more about.
And what are some techniques that we can do to improve that level of safety, to have those meaningful conversations?
Assume nothing would be my number one. Is it sounds very simple, and I also think, so maybe it's a two-part. One is to not assume, and two is to ask questions from a place of two parts: kindness and curiosity. Because I think that conveys, I think asking a question when it comes from a deep desire to understand and from a kind place can go a long way. And of one.
I think that's a fear that a lot of people have in their mind, is that they're afraid to ask the question because they're afraid of offense and how to really dig in.
And so let me join you on that too, Sam, then, to offer what not to do, which is to not ask leading questions. Don't ask the question with a period at the end of it. Don't, and again, the converse, don't assume, I think can be really helpful. And the format of the question being open-ended is important. So help me understand what that's like, or even calling out that my intention is not to offend, I want to understand. Can we have a conversation about this? Also leading with, I've done some reading and research. Here's what I believe to be true, and I'd like to understand what your experience is like, because it could be very different depending on where you grew up, where you can, just like the lens we all bring to this conversation today. It varies by person.
One of the things Angela and I experienced together was a trusted advisor course taught by a woman named Andrea Howe. And there's this brilliant chapter in her journey about caveats, how you can use caveats to enter into these conversations, or to make sure people know that this is something delicate or something that's coming from a kindness and curious perspective. And, you know, every time I talk to Angela, I feel I'm getting this repetition in how to enter into this environment in the right mindset and in the right way. And that's something that I kind of pledged I wanted to do for myself, so that I wouldn't avoid the environment or avoid the question or avoid these things, but I could feel more comfortable over time. You know, as you were talking just now, Angela, I was thinking about repetitions where I hold the space, I'm more curious, and coming from a kind perspective. And even today, you know, I still ask these leading questions, but how do I really focus on the ways that I ask questions in these topics, because I paused. You know, I'm going to compliment you here in our own cast. Would you just have such a good way of making this go from a very daunting thing to a very manageable, I can do it thing? Like, there's nothing you said that makes me feel like I can't participate or can't have successes or can't make progress every single time I enter into something like this. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to partner with you on this. And I'm so glad that you said yes.
Sure. Cheers, Wade. I'd also say, if you have to apologize, say I'm sorry and keep it short. Don't elaborate.
Yeah, we all have a problem with just kind of just letting it all spill out, and sometimes it spills too much, right? So that's
Right.
great advice for sure. Now, one of the most important things in trying to initialize change in institutions and organizations and in companies is I think one of the places to start, of course, is with leadership. And so, when you engage with leaders and in these projects for training and development and around diversity, equity, inclusion, and so forth, what are some of the common problems that you see in ensuring that it gains hold?
I'm just taking a quick note. So, and I hear two questions there, Sam. So if I miss anything, circle back for sure. And Wade, you're also in these conversations, so want to make space for you as well. With regard to leadership, I think at this point, by and large, the notion that inequity exists is, I'm going to restate that. I want to say that by and large, the notion that inequity exists is, if you will, common knowledge. I think it's common knowledge in pockets where it's talked about or it's accepted. The research is there. There's no shortage of it or lack of validity within it. With regard to it taking hold, the biggest friction that I notice is willingness to make changes, is willingness to wait until it's isn't this ironic? A willingness to pause, a willingness to pause in order to do the right thing, to make the right decision, to wait for a hire that adds to a more diverse workforce, to make a little bit more investment of time in order to shift what an organization looks like or how it creates inclusive programs. That's the end of my sentence. Wade.
I have a little sign on my head that says, if you have this really deep, dark secret, or you're really struggling with something, share it with me. As a more sensitive male, that's part of what I bring to the table when people engage with me. It's happened throughout my life, throughout my career. And what I find is when I talk to people, just like Angela said, they don't necessarily know where to begin. And I think they sometimes make it a lot more complicated. They're kind of like, where do I start? And you could say, well, there is a lot of research, there are a lot of programs, there are a lot of people that can help you, versus feeling like it's all on your shoulders. What I try to do is, when I spread hope, is the hope is an action. What is the action you can take right now that can help you? I have a dear friend who is shadowing a boss at an automation company, and it was predominantly white males. And he has done everything that could possibly done to make it a more diverse organization. And it's a beautiful thing to watch, but it's also been heavily laborious at times. And you're thinking, he knows what he wants to do and he knows what he has to do, but he has to change culture and he has to do other things at the same time. And sometimes I just see, I see two types of leaders. I see the ones that have given themselves permission to do something about it, and the ones that are paralyzed by the fear that they're going to do something wrong, and then they just never begin. And there are other types of leaders, but the ones that I see most are those two types. And so what I try to do with my art is to get people to feel like, yes, you don't have to wait for somebody to come and help you. You can make a decision right now and you can do something amazing. And it doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to have a pre-qualifier. It can just be something great. And that research is there and those programs are there and those people are there that can help you. So I think my fear a lot of times is people isolate themselves when they're going through something really difficult. They're like, well, I guess I'm the only leader who's going through this, or the only company who's going through this. And so I'm just going to, hold on tight to everything that's comfortable versus opening up to everything that's possible.
Right.
So it's a very intimate conversation a lot of the time. So you have to raise the levels of intimacy, I think, in order to find what Angela's been talking about, those kind and curious questions on where you can start and how you can start to unpack them. Angela, what are your thoughts? I mean, I'm trying to be charitable with what I'm hearing, because what I told myself today when I prepared for this conversation, I didn't want to throw stones and I didn't want to make it worse. I wanted to make it actionable, and I wanted to make people feel like they could be part of something immediately if they wanted to, not like they've done something wrong and they're making it worse. So
Certainly. I think the only thing I'd add to that piece, Wade, is the notion of oftentimes the whole concept of where to start. It can be helpful. And again, I know we're referencing the journal, and I'm not referencing the journal overly intentionally, if you will, only to offer that working to identify examples or instances in life where you have been the other, where you have not been within the majority group, or you've been the only in the room, no matter what that looks like for you. If you can tap into what that experience is like, that is another avenue to open up yourself for the conversation, to get an understanding of what someone else's experience might be like, or even to start to imagine. And again, not to assume, but to maybe get curious and wonder what that experience is like, which again connects then into a bit more empathy with regard to anything. If someone is the only person in a room representing any number of things, whether they be a member of a marginalized community, or a country that's in war, getting an understanding of what it might feel like can help enter into the conversation.
Something else.
Well,
go ahead. Go ahead, Char.
Oh, yes. And I think this is absolutely fascinating when you're talking about where to start. And I have been reflecting since this dialogue, because, it's interesting. I just want to remind us all, our society was extremely uncomfortable about talking about these types of topics, right? And over the last many decades, we started utilizing humor to talk about these kinds of topics. And humor, I actually took a communication course about humor in one of my communication classes, believe it or not, because humor is oftentimes things that are uncomfortable. So if you think about it, Eddie Murphy did Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood on Saturday Night Live. Archie Bunker talked about these issues on a comedy show. Moving on Up and Golden Girls, and another movie called White Chicks, and Shallow Hal that dealt with obesity. And even the first openly gay character in TV was in 1982 in All My Children, which was a soap opera, right? And then in my career in the 90s and 2000s, then we were writing up people for joking about these types of topics. We were writing up people for making a joke or a comedy kind of thing because of the uncomfortableness of having these dialogues. So HR implemented these DEI programs to train diversity and inclusion. But what was missing was pulling all these individuals together and having open, honest, transparent dialogue. And it's not necessarily, I mean, we can laugh a little bit, but it's not using comedy to have these really authentic, crucial conversations. So going back to Angela, where you say where to start, I think we need to acknowledge that there's a history in our culture where we struggled with where to start. And I think that we need to take an honest perspective of our own companies and cultures in our companies of where we were a decade ago, because we could barely talk about it and write up people or fire people for these things, to today actually having these crucial conversations. So I'm sorry, that was my comment about where we start. I find that fascinating.
I was sitting here thinking about where to start and sometimes why you're starting. Are you coming from a place of guilt or sometimes from a place of new understanding? And Angela, when you were bringing up the point about starting quietly, once you've had a chance to reflect, I had a lot of guilt when I started to unpack my white privilege and the things that I've benefited from my whole life, when I finally found out that these things are not because I was wildly successful. In many cases, it was sometimes just because of my disposition and where I began, when I was born. And so I started with a lot of guilt and fear that I wasn't allowed to participate in the conversation because of that. And that was one of the things that I've learned from Angela on ways I can participate, where I don't have to feel like I should be the quietest or that I shouldn't have anything to say, but how do I participate? And having reflected, I can get a lot more out of that participation, having been quiet about it first versus just blurting out the things that may have not made progress or have really helped in the past.
I think it's very true in the boardroom, absolutely, as well as many meetings. And I feel that I also am a white woman here, but unable to really just openly and talk about it without being concerned of being rejected or perceived as not understanding. You don't understand. You have not been in my shoes, and you have no right to speak. And I think it's important that we just to really focus on how do we create a culture that psychological safety in having these open, honest dialogues without consequence is really a leader or an executive's role to set the stage, and having professionals such as yourselves and Angela facilitate that, I think is very crucial in any organization. So people are not afraid to openly talk about these very challenging discussions.
Companies have been talking about DEI initiatives now for years, but it feels like the needle really hasn't moved much in the course of that time. Any insight as to what's going on and why things aren't changing? I mean, I know it's not like putting in a new benefits program overnight. It takes time, but it just seems like I think the employee population is like maybe companies aren't moving fast enough or doing enough.
So Howard, I'll jump in with you on that. Systemic historical patterns is the short answer. And as far as making it go faster, it requires that more individuals that are part of dominant groups show up and represent marginalized communities. And by that, I don't mean speaking for them, but I mean creating this space so that they too can show up in the conversation and they can join the conversation or the organization or the team or the community group, whatever it is. And that's so much harder because we have so much historical context that is contrary to that.
Mhm.
Not saying it's impossible. And again, that's the notion. Go back to that quote of changing the game as opposed to swapping jerseys. And it's and Char, to your point about psychological safety, it's creating that environment and acknowledging too that for marginalized communities for hundreds of thousands of years, psychological safety has been absent. And when they come to a conversation, when a marginalized community comes to a conversation where there's a dominant community, there's a power construct. And so it's all very complicated. None of this is easy. And it's encouraging to see people showing up for the conversation.
Yeah, good point. And a lot of what we talk about in our people strategy forums is how do you create a psychologically safe environment for our talent and talent management strategies. And as an HR professional myself in charge of some of these programs and partnering with my colleagues around DEI and et cetera, it was very complicated because we just thought it was about the numbers of diverse hires, for example, and we hired X number of hires, but culturally, we never were moving the needle and creating the psychological safety to really have these crucial discussions. Instead, we were disciplining people and making it hard for anyone to talk about it. So yeah, I definitely think that is a very interesting conversation of making it safe for people to discuss. And that's not always easy.
And representation too, right? Representation matters. If you have a senior leadership team that doesn't look like the rest of the world, then we have people in the organization that don't see themselves in leadership. And then it's we're back in the whole cycle.
And then it's, those are the suits walking down the hall. And then, and then behind the scenes and many employees say, well, the suits left, but there's no conversation with the suits. So yeah, I totally agree. How do we open up that bridge of authenticity and communication and being comfortable to say, I was in a meeting the other day and even to a senior executive, and you made this comment and I found it extremely offensive. And quite frankly, I feel that many of my colleagues, and how do we coach each other and manage up? I call it managing up to our senior leaders so that we can be brutally honest and say, this culture is affecting us as a company and affecting our productivity and ultimately our survival as an organization. And I would tell you that our society today is definitely employees looking to work for companies, expect companies that value diversity and inclusion. And if that company can't represent that, they're going to go to another company. And so it's a big part of the talent management strategy program.
So I want to take a risk. I know this is shocking a lot of you that have gotten to know me a little bit, that I want to take a risk. But in the journal workshops that I've done, I ask people to look at a quote and take a moment and reflect and see where their head goes. And I'm curious if we could practice kind of what we're talking about here today with journaling and look at a quote together and maybe just see where it takes us. So this quote is on page 30 of the journal. And the quote is, "There are no birds in last year's nest," by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. There are no birds in last year's nest. And maybe Jules, you could put that in the chat, and the people that are out there listening could think about what that means to them in regards to this conversation. And a younger version of me would have said, well, this is what it means to me. But I am very curious to think, where does that quote take us when we hear there are no birds in last year's nests, after we've been talking about some of the challenges that we've encountered as individuals, some of the places where we've started and where we want to go? Where does our head take us on DEI when we think about that? And maybe we can take 30 or 45 seconds and come up with it, and we could do a little sharing either in the chat or as a panel. But I think
Well,
to honor this, right?
you know, when I would hope we think of as a positive context, right? Because, you know, last year's nest is not the same as this year's nest. Every year we create new nests. And to me, as baby birds fly the nest, it means the baby birds have learned to fly. And I would say that's career mobility. And that if we are a positive organization, that those baby birds are now flying, and that's just one little thought I come up with. So I'd be interested what other people think.
I was thinking about how your world is small when you're young, and there's that comfort and, you know, perceived safety and security. But then as you grow up, you need to leave that nest and fly and expand your vision of what the world is. So that's where it was taking me.
I like that. And my thoughts is that, you know, of course, a nest is a spot where we consider a safe place, right? A safe place. And as we grow or expand, we create those new nests, to what Char mentioned, and a new safe place, the one that's evolved, that has a new place for us to develop our families, develop our cultures and people.
We have some comments in the chat I wanted to be sure to share. Andre says that for him, it brings up, to live your life, you have to realize our context is time, space, and relationships. Everything moves forward. And Megan said, it makes me think that even nature sees that balance requires new growth.
Very powerful.
I don't even want to share because those are so profound.
I know. but real quick,
But
though,
what I was thinking was, like, when we hang on to the past, it doesn't help us move forward.
That's right.
And so, like, that's what was coming up for me, is like Wade, you were saying, do we come from this place of guilt? You know, and that doesn't necessarily help us if we're like just still holding on to last year's birds and last year's nest, you know. Anyways, that's not as profound as those nice comments.
You're very good.
I actually I'm a grown-ass man, and I had to realize I'm a baby on some topics. And I'm a baby bird in some of these conversations because I haven't spent enough time, or I don't have enough life experience, or I haven't been marginalized for very long. So I feel a lot younger versus older and wiser in certain topics. And so I was humbled by that thought of where I would be in nature, depending on if I'm still if I consider myself small enough to be in that nest as a baby bird, was what my thought was.
But
Jules, can we put you on the spot, Jules? Are we allowed to ask you? Is that all right? Am I breaking all the rules?
Of course, but like, I'm like Wendy, I'm like, you guys just covered it so well. But I was also thinking, like, leaving that nest is also taking that leap of faith to expand. And you know, it was kind of coming back to what Sam said about safety. You have the safety of your nest, but by leaving that nest, you are just taking that leap of faith. You have maybe no idea what's out there in the world, but you're willing to explore it. And I think that that can also just be applied to so many areas of life and career and relationships. So that's my 2 cents. But I'm like Wendy, you guys covered it so well, so beautifully. So.
But thank you, Wade, for that wonderful example of how we can use art and a journal like that to discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion in this type of environment, and in a safe way, right? In a very productive way, right? So I know we're getting towards the top of the hour here. I'd love to hear a little bit more about these workshops you just mentioned, about going through this process. What does that look like?
So I'll start. The journal workshops are as simple as getting together and kind of sharing how we created these things and why we created it, and a lot of what we've talked about today. But then it's getting the repetitions in on what it's like when you reflect. So allowing there to be silence in the room. I mean, Angela can attest to that as a facilitator. When you ask a question and you let people sit there for 7 minutes and think about it, it feels like an eternity after COVID, because we're so used to this immediate response in these virtual environments, but being quiet. So the journal workshops are really designed to give people a chance to reflect and start to see the potential. I mean, look at the progress we just made a moment ago. We all had something happen, and all we did was look at one quote. And so to me, it's just starting that momentum. Angela?
I agree. And again, I feel like we're a little bit full circle to the point of starting, trying, giving it a go. The larger conversation around what a workshop can look like can also vary depending on who we're working with. It can be an hour, it can be a week. And so it's an interesting conversation, Sam, on what does this look like? And I think too, in some capacity, it often depends on the group in front of us to determine what's a good fit. There are some groups where, this is going to maybe sound random. My experience, at least to date, of teachers is that they are very heart-based. I can drop into a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we can go really deep, really, really fast. If I'm in a room, and again, these are generalizations, and I am not attempting to stereotype, I'm simply speaking to my experience of different groups. And I'll share the next story, and then I'm going to add on to it when I conclude it. But I've worked in a room of engineers, and we may not get as deep as quickly, but we'll get there. And how we get there looks very different. I had a participant in one of the programs that I worked with Wade at, who approached me, engineer, deep engineer, excellent engineer, came up to me one of the first days of class and said, "So my wife says I need to work on empathy. Are we going to talk about that?" Yep, we'll talk about that. We'll get there. And so again, it's how we get to the conversation can look very different depending on the group. So with that type of a group, it may be more of a step-by-step process than it would be with teachers, where we may actually start about speaking about their experience first, if you will. And so it varies. And I know that's not a baked response, Sam, to the question, but and that really, in my mind, connects really strongly to the concepts of diversity, equity, inclusion, in that we're meeting the group or the person where they are, as opposed to starting with something that comes straight off the shelf and says, "Here, do this." It's more of getting a better understanding of where that client sits and what their challenges are to engage in the conversation and move from that point, as opposed to wherever I am or wherever Wade is that day.
I think Angela and I would enter the room with elements of things that are possible. And I mean, it is a very improvisational opportunity, because if you scripted it, you'd miss out on a lot of things. But if you say, where does the group need to go and how can we help them get there? There are so many different possibilities with journaling that you're basically just finding a way to help them start. And they're all going to find a different reason. They're all going to keep going for their own reason. And that's the beauty of it. I mean, the people that come back to me with thoughts in their journals are no joke. Like, these people they have gone through the wilderness. They have wrestled with some things. It's really neat to see. But the people that have the journal and haven't filled it they'll start when they're ready. There's no right or wrong answer. They're just starting. I don't know.
Thanks, Wade. Well, I do want to acknowledge our speaker for next week to inform everybody. We're going to be listening to Scott Benson on the whole person workplace next Wednesday. So please join us on the People Strategy Forum for that. But as we wait for that discussion next week, Wade and Angela, I know a lot of our listeners are wondering, how can I learn more? How can I contact Wade and utilize those artistic benefits for our next meeting or offsite or whatever it may be. So Angela, how can people get a hold of you and learn more about this topic?
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn, so find me. I don't know that there's a lot of me with my last name, but feel free to reach out that way. And then I'm trying to think, actually. Wait, I can't remember. I think we put our contact on the book, but now I'm not seeing it. And so I need to follow up on that, but I can be reached on LinkedIn. I'll also type my email into the chat so folks can have it if you want to reach me directly that way. That's fine for me. Wade?
And we will have the, we will share the link to where people are interested in getting a hold of the journal, where they can get that on the, on LinkedIn as well. It's in the chat right here. What
Yeah.
about you, Wade?
So Angela and I made a conscious choice to print this locally. We self-published with a small company called Trembling Giant here in Maryland, and they have been wonderful at helping us get this out into the world. We get to sign them as often as we can. I know Wendy has some signed copies, and Sam, you were gracious enough to share this with your clients. But yeah, Angela and I love what we do. We absolutely love it. And I can be reached on LinkedIn as well. I'm very active on there. I do post a little time-lapse video every single day, every single weekday on LinkedIn when I'm not doing workshops, to just let people have a little glimpse into the process, to be still, to take a moment, to take a deep breath. But it's really, this is a process, and I started with drawing these little quotes. I think a lot of little things add up to something great. And so when I draw for the workshops, I am inserting hope wherever I go, because I think it's an action. I think it's something that we have to do a little bit of each day so that we get used to it. But it does start to feel good over time, and you just have to put yourself out there. So yeah, LinkedIn, Instagram, I do the same thing. They're shorter reels because of the algorithms, which, but LinkedIn to me is where I'm most active, and I write my reflections. Sorry, I said on a podcast on this conversation. I'm like, come on. But this has been great. I'm really thrilled with this panel and how interactive you are and how thoughtful you are. I think you make this such an easy format to participate in. So thank you again for hosting.
Thank you all.
Yeah, I really love having you on, both you, Wade and Angela. I mean, it's just such an important topic, and I just love to highlight the important medium. I mean, I just love the fact that this is an art, mindfulness. You know, we're reflecting on this important topic, because I think that's where it makes all the difference in making this stick, making people really have behavior change. So thank you so much, both you, Wade and Angela, for putting the hard work together, to putting this together, and sharing it with the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you.
Likewise.
All
Thank you
right.
all.
Well, have a wonderful week, and we'll see everyone on next week's People Strategy Forum. Take care.
Take care.
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.